On an afternoon when the sun was high in the sky. The forest was so quiet that even the wind seemed to have forgotten where to blow. But what if a lion could look a man in the eye and ask for help? Was such a thing really possible? And when that moment comes, should you run, or stay? This is the story of a man who answers that question, and of a predator who asks for help. But it's not like any story you know. Orwen Vale's feet were too tense to feel the gas pedal of the huge Land Cruiser. The moment he turned the steering wheel, small stones, mixed with the dust of the steppe, flew out from under the tires, scattering like a short scream. The sound of the brakes echoed across the desertified landscape of the Masai Mara. The vehicle skidded to a stop at almost a 45-degree angle. But Orwen's eyes were still staring straight ahead. Because right in front of him, looming in the dust, was the most extraordinary plea of a lifetime. A male lion stood in the middle of the road, unmoving. His body was huge, his muscles trembling with fatigue. His mane was flowing like golden strands burnt in the sun. But his eyes, there was something in those eyes. They didn't challenge Orwen. They didn't glare to hunt. They weren't even threatening. They were the tired, desperate eyes of a father who didn't know what to do, looking for help. He was broken. The king of the steppe was pleading with his eyes. Orwen didn't get out of the car. To do so in the first minute would have been suicide. But he didn't know what to expect. Because the creature in front of him was behaving in a way that no textbook could describe. It was a predator, but at the same time something else had happened. It was as if he stood somewhere between two worlds. Not quite savage, not quite understandable. He was motionless, but his silence seemed to cry out. As the dust cloud slowly dissipated, Orwen's gaze shifted to the lion's back. Movement or stillness in the grass. He narrowed his eyes. His heart was beating like a tongue that had forgotten words. He looked over and saw a torso. On the ground, covered in blood, almost motionless. There was a visible rise in the abdomen, as if life was trying to get out of it, but the outside world would not allow it. It was a lioness. And she was pregnant. Orwen's throat went dry. The wind around him seemed to disappear. In the burning air, like hot breath, there was only the sound of his heart. Part of him said, "This is their world. Come back." The other part was screaming, "If you don't help now, that female will die and so will the unborn cubs." He held the door for a moment, unable to make up his mind. But then the male lion took a step, but this step was not taken in anger. It was not a body contracted for an attack. On the contrary, it was a trembling body, walking with difficulty. There was no threat in that step. Just a retreat, and he turned and looked back towards the female. And in that moment, Orwen's insides shattered. Because that sound, that was the sound. The lion hadn't roared. It was just a very deep moan, like a growl. It sounded like the weariness of centuries. And it meant only one thing, please. That's when he decided. This was a place where the wild laws of nature ruled, yes. But that day, something else would rule. On that day, a man and an animal would transgress their own laws. Orwen took a deep breath. And he opened the door. As soon as his foot touched the ground, the crunching grass competed with the silence that descended. He began to walk slowly, his hands at his sides. He made no eye contact, no sound. His heart felt as if it would tear his chest apart. He did not move towards the lion, but towards the female. Because it was no longer just one creature that needed help. What lay there held 3, maybe 4, maybe more lives inside it. A silent army, not yet even born, but wanting to live. As he got closer to the female, the details began to open up. Her eyes were closed. Her mouth ajar. Her torso was covered in blood, but it had obviously already run out. There was a deep wound on her back leg. His breathing was ragged, wheezing, hoarse. And his stomach. When Orwen bent down, when he put his hand lightly on it, he felt something. A small, faint push. A kick. Those inside were still alive. At that moment, the male lion's shadow fell over him. Orwin only stood for a moment without looking up. He closed his eyes. The only thought that ran through his mind was, this could be my last moment. But the blow didn't come. The bite did not come. In that second when he held his breath, he felt only warm air on his neck. The lion had just stopped. With her. His body against hers, his head on her belly. A huge, giant body, but at that moment it was just a huge heart. Orwin opened his eyes. He knew then that the sight would be unforgettable. Above the ground, a bond was formed between the three creatures. A bond that no words can describe. A ranger, a lion, a mother, and unborn cubs. That he took out the radio. His fingers trembled. He dialed the number, but there was no signal. There was no answer. He looked around. There was steppe everywhere. No helicopters, no help, just dried grass and a setting sun. The sky was getting darker. Time was running out. But the female was still breathing. And the life inside was still moving, still alive. Orwin knelt down. He took some gauze and water from his bag. His first aid knowledge was limited. But compared to not helping at all, anything he could do was vital. He began to clean the blood. The female moaned slightly but did not react. She did not run away. She didn't attack. Because maybe, he knew. He didn't know how to tell when help was coming, but this time he knew. She heard a growl behind her. The male lion was circling around them. His tail was not angry, but anxious. His eyes followed Orwin's hands. He said nothing, but everything was clear. If she died, she would be held to account, not even by this man, but by life. Orwin put his hand on her abdomen again. This time he felt 3 separate stirrings. 3 little lives inside, waiting hopefully in the darkness. The sun was setting, but the light inside them still burned. He had to save them. There was no turning back. There he was, kneeling on the ground, his heart in the dust, and that's actually where the story began. Because if some lives are not born, we lose our humanity. As Orwin cleaned the lioness's wounds with his hands, the sun slowly crept westward across the sky. With each passing minute, the shadows lengthened and the temperature began to drop. The golden grass of the Masai Mara was darkening now, darkening like the threat that loomed over them. The lion still stood just behind him, like a shadow. Orwin was working at the same time, acting on instinct. Years in the wild had taught him to always be careful. But this was different. What stood before him was not a predator, but a mate, a father, a guardian. And the pregnant lioness lying next to him was no longer just a wild animal, but a sacred relic that carried life within it. The female's breath was shallow and weak. Her wounds were deep. Blood soaked through her fur. Orwin felt life slowly ebbing away at his fingertips. Each touch felt like a farewell. But then, another movement. A very light kick from inside the torso lying in his lap. No, it wasn't over yet. In the middle of the wilderness, walking arm in arm with death, this female was still fighting for something. And so were those inside. This was no longer just a rescue operation. This was a last chance for life. That he tried the radio again. Orwin Vale. Masai Mara, West Sector. Urgent intervention required. Pregnant lioness in critical condition. The cubs are moving. I repeat, a pregnant lion is bleeding to death. Please respond. But the response was again only humming. Static sound, as if the world didn't want to hear it. Or as if only the wilderness has the right to speak here, in this land. Orwin turned his head. The male lion was still watching them. His eyes burned with a protective instinct, but he was not aggressive. On the contrary, there was that familiar feeling that sits like a knot in one's throat, fear. A predator was afraid of losing. His female. His cubs. He couldn't suppress the anger inside himself for not being able to protect them. But this anger flowed inward, not outward. Orwin squinted and looked around. There was no movement in the vast steppes of the Masai Mara. No sound of vehicles, no hum of helicopters. Only the wind and the rustling of the grass. He felt more and more alone. Time was running out. The blood was not stopping. And the sky was rapidly changing color. Darkness was approaching. She opened her bag. She had only a few bandages, sterile water and a small antibiotic spray. It was not enough. But she was determined to do her best. He pressed the cloth to the bleeding area. She moaned slightly but was still responsive. That was a good sign. Then once more, those tiny stirrings inside. Hope, and at that moment, something unexpected happened. The male lion lunged forward. Orwin reflexively drew back, but the lion didn't attack. On the contrary, he reached for her. He wrapped his huge body around her. He rested his head against hers. Not a hiss or a roar, just a deep moan. It was not a posture of defense, but a farewell. The lion wanted to stay with his female. And Orwin knew what that meant. If this female could not be saved, this lion would die here that night. Not from hunger. From loneliness. The radio crackled again. This time a muffled but clear voice. Vale, we hear, help, on the way, about 70 minutes, 70 minutes. Orwin checked the time. This female didn't have that much time. Maybe not even 7 minutes. Death in the wild didn't ask for time. And while the cubs struggled to live inside, their mother kept life flowing through her fingers. She took a box out of her backpack. The only serum package she kept for emergencies. Normally it was for human beings. But in this case, one life could not be more precious than another. He carefully prepared the syringe. The male lion looked up. Their eyes met. Orwin did not look away. He knelt slowly. He showed him the syringe. I'm helping, he said in a whisper. The lion stared for a moment, then closed his eyes. He leaned his head against her again that he carefully inserted the needle into the muscle. It was impossible to find a vein, but a little fluid might buy a few more minutes. He moved his fingers under her nose. There was breath, but very faint. Immediately afterwards he put his ear to her abdomen. The stirrings inside were clearer now. That meant, hope, then, a sound in the distance. The sound of an engine. Very far away. Maybe 10 kilometers, maybe more. Help was coming. But fast enough. Orwin fell to his knees. Not from fatigue, but from the weight. The weight of the responsibility he carried inside him. The lion was still beside him, watching him. He didn't take a step back, didn't make a move. Only his eyes locked on Orwin's hands. There was no longer just a ranger there, on that land. There was a father, a protector, a beacon of hope. Minutes passed. The blood didn't stop, but it slowed. The lion's head is lower now. His eyelids heavy. Orwin put his hand on the female's neck. There was still breath. But very shallow. And then, the wind changed. From above, a shadow began to pass. In the sky, the sound of the helicopter pierced the silence of the steppe. Help had finally arrived. But would it be enough? As the vehicles approached, Orwin slowly stood up. He put his hand in front of the lion. They are helping, he said in a low voice. For you. The lion raised its head. His ears twitched. And for a moment, just for a moment, something flashed in his eyes. Like thanks, or maybe just permission. He did not leave her side. People came. The vets ran. The transport stretcher was prepared. But Orwin didn't touch anything. He just stood. In the middle of that bridge. On that thin line between man and nature. When the helicopter landed, a cloud of dust covered everything. As the female was lifted, the male lion didn't move a step. He just put his head down. He wiggled his tail. The cubs were still inside. They were not yet born. But at that moment, they were a little closer to the world. While the dust was still dancing in the sky, a surgical station a few meters wide was set up in the middle of the Masai Mara, which stretched like a field. The sun was no longer setting, the sky had turned purple. Orwin walked beside the aid team, hesitant to step on the ground, as if misstepping would crush the last hope on the ground. The lioness was carefully placed on the stretcher. Her muscles twitched involuntarily, her breathing becoming more labored with each exhalation. The life inside her was still there, but the doors were slowly closing. The vet prepared his hands quickly but meticulously. The assistants arranged the supplies. The fine dust carried by the side wind howled on the tarpaulins drawn around the sterile field. This was not a hospital. This was the most primitive operating table, drawn on the line between nature and death. The male lion was still there. Close but motionless. Every eye movement, every breath, seemed to repeat an oath of protection. He would probably tear apart anyone who tried to stop him. But right now he was just watching. As if he was trying to trust these strangers in whose hands he had placed his fate. Orwin stood on the sidelines. He couldn't take his eyes off her belly for a moment. When the first cut was made, he felt his heart pounding in his chest. In the silence, the sound of a single knife was like the beginning of a battle. The blood flowed again, but this time it was more organized. It was controlled. But time was still the enemy. The pulse was weakening. And for those inside, the window was closing every second. When they reached the first cub, everyone gasped. The vet slowly removed the tiny, wet, ball of fur. Ears that seemed not yet formed, closed eyes, tiny paws that didn't move. The silence grew heavy. Not even the air moved anymore. No one breathed. No one said anything. The cub did not move. Orwin was frozen inside. All this effort, all this waiting, all this praying. Would it all end in this silence? Then, a movement. The cub's chest trembled. His mouth opened. And then, the sound, a thin, weak, but knife-sharp scream. The first sign of life. The first breath of a lion cub in the middle of the wilderness, breaking through the invisible darkness. Nobody shouted. No one clapped. But everyone had tears in their eyes. Orwin bowed his head. Tears fell from his eyes and mingled with the earth. The male lion looked up. He had heard the sound under the tarpaulin. He pricked up his ears. And quietly, no one could hear him, he purred. He was a father for the first time. And this sound was the continuation of his lineage. The second cub came soon after. Stronger, moving faster. The third, then the fourth. Nature had opened the door to death, but life had managed to enter, but the female still didn't move. For her, the battle continued. But that first scream, that single breath, wrote something in the souls of everyone in the team, the lion, and Orwin. This story will not end here. As the morning sun rose over the Masai Mara, a light mist drifted through the trees. Orwin was on his knees, leaning his hands on the ground, waiting. His eyes were inside the tent. Had he woken up? Is she still alive? Were the cubs still alive? He couldn't even remember the last 12 hours. Only her hands still smelled of blood. Her heart was still stuck on the first scream. A veterinarian emerged from the tent and shook his head slightly. No smile, no drama. Just one sentence. He opened his eyes. And that was it. But for Orwin, it was like the world had started spinning again. The lioness was saved. For the time being. And the cubs were alive. With trembling, shaky steps, but stubbornly. But the story didn't end there. When Orwin walked back into the field, he realized that the male lion was gone. He wasn't standing. He wasn't lying down either. He was gone. He looked around. There were no tracks, no tracks. No claw marks, no broken grass. It was as if a huge shadow had been swallowed by the earth. In the middle of the night, without a sound, just gone. He had seen the female and her cubs, saved. Perhaps his work was done. Or maybe he was still watching, unseen, from another corner of the forest, the vet smiled slightly. That's what lions do sometimes, he said. The cubs are safe. Then, they retreat. But inside Orwin there was another possibility. Maybe everything that had happened had come at a price. Maybe the lion had made its own deal with the sky that night. As one of the cubs struggled to his feet, the lioness reached up and licked him with her tongue. For the first time, the maternal instinct was visible. A tired but resilient mother. And 3 fragile but stubborn lion cubs. Orwin turned his head to the sky. The wind was blowing hard. But there was a whisper in that wind. Why do you think the male lion disappeared? Did he leave to come back, or did he say goodbye quietly? Leave your thoughts in the comments. It didn't escape our minds, and if this story has moved you, if you want to add your voice to this silent struggle in the heart of nature, subscribe, leave a comment, and write your own answer to this question. How far can you leave your fears behind to save lives? Because sometimes a life is just a decision away, and sometimes, as close as a lion's gaze.